Welcome everyone to today's session with Jenny and Chris. It's lovely to have you here. And just quick reminders, you're welcome regardless of where you are, what time you're in, regardless of ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, ability or disability, all are welcome. And we try to be inclusive as possible. We try to make space for others and always try to have positive intentions. And if anyone needs any help, you can reach out to me or Mia. And we always try to be accessible as possible with visuals. And when we do breakout rooms or any activity, please don't hesitate to reach out or to any of the hosts. And also, I hope you all have a wonderful session. Thank you.
Oh, that was lovely. Thank you, Noreen. She did a great job. So we'll start by sharing our slides. Cool, Chris will.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So let's give it a moment. There we go. Ta-da! It's now showing up on my screen, so hopefully it's on everyone else's. But we'll introduce ourselves on the next slide. But this is a liberatory practice in online communities, and it's focused on building tools to bring us together. And we're going to look really specifically around asynchronous communities, asynchronous practice, and also bringing liberating structures and liberatory practices into spaces that sometimes it might feel more difficult to build that sense of liberatory community, but also at the same time, we're feeling a need to be able to do so in that kind of space. So that's what Chris and I are going to chat about and hopefully mostly talk to you guys about. And we're also going to demo something and then you can have a go. On the next slide, we've indulged ourselves from the very beginning. So I'm Jenny Blake. I provide the primes. Chris has known me for so long that he was in fact the person who noticed I like prime numbers. So when I teach or when I divide things up or anything like that, I tend to end up using a prime. It's just all other numbers are available. I just like them. And so we've known each other for quite a while now, and we've actually been talking about online learning and community and how to transform some of the practices that work so well and that feel natural in person together into things that can be almost more longitudinal and encompass sort of, for example, groups of participants who may take modules one after the other if you teach at university, or maybe in your class year on year if you teach in a school, or may just be people you run into, you know, with time gaps in between. How do we build community across time as well as across space? And then there's Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris, as you can see. Yeah, Jenny's put I provide the puns. I like a good pun. I also love a good prime. I like spotting patterns, which I think is where the puns come from. And the pattern I've spotted on this slide was, as you can see, I'm by the sea in the picture, but that made me think where we are in Great Britain. One fact is that you are never more than 70 miles from the sea. But I'm kind of wishing today that we were a little closer to the sea. So yeah, and also in the prime number space, you're never more than one from a multiple of six, apart from 2 and 3. So I've linked it back to primes. You will see Jenny mostly put things in groups of 3. There is an errant group of 4 in one of the slides, but we'll let that slip.
Yes, I try and like incorporate other numbers so as not to become too hidebound. So what we're going to go through today, we want to let you reflect on and also reflect on with you our intentions, because part of what we're talking about are ways to take your values and principles and sort of let go of them and try and see them throughout something where you may not have as much sort of social control or leverage because you're really just putting something out there and on some level hoping others engage. So we're going to discuss an approach that we take to liberating practice in asynchronous contexts. Both Chris and I spend a lot of time trying to help about 50,000 students. So there's no way we can meet each of them face to face. We can't bring them all together. There's a lot of barriers in our way, in addition to which we should be there for them when they need us, which has a lot to do with their time, their context, and their sort of capacity. And that really does mean asynchronous support. So how do we do that and still also be adhering to the liberatory values that we think are so important? We're also going to have a play because learning should be playful. So we're going to try out one version of a troika tool that Chris has been iterating for a little while now. You may be familiar with troika, but if not, don't worry, we're going to explain. And then we're going to dream big about what might happen next. I remember Ruha Benjamin's talk that a lot of us attended around dreams and technology. And I think one of the nicest things about MYFest is a chance to kind of look at something and dream about what it might mean and what we might do with it later, even if we don't see the path to that now. There's literally now a helicopter outside my window, so apologies. So that's our agenda for today. Why don't we go ahead and go to the next one? With this one, do you want to take accessibility first, Chris, while the helicopter goes by me? There you go.
Yeah, sure. So this is the one with four steps in the list. But I've found something special about that number anyway. It is a semi-prime, and it's the only even square semi-prime. So Jennie has accepted it. We have a picture of a stool here as well, which I just wanted to start by saying is a nod to troika, which is done in groups of 3, and to sitting and listening, which is a key part of troika. So accessibility first. Our approach is to start often with text first, asynchronous first when we're building something, and then to look at how that might work also in synchronous ways, also in beyond text ways. And that's something that we're going to look at in our sort of exploration today. Has the helicopter finished? Or do you want me to keep
Like
going?
perfect timing because literally just landed down the road. So it's the other thing that we want to think about and also find our balance with is that it needs to be safe. So some of the issues around asynchronous tools, especially ones that obviously promote online, perhaps on the open web, is that there is an issue around is it safe to join? How do I know if it's safe to join? How can you make something inclusive and also a place where people feel like they will be supported for who they are? If there is this sort of element of, well, I'm just not sure who I'm going to be in this space with. At the same time, though, sometimes I think it's really important that you don't strip away all the opportunities to learn from each other. So once you've created structures that allow for that safety, that demand that safety and those expectations of community, how do you then invite in the opportunity to learn both from each other and from the experience of being together? In addition to that, we wanted to make sure that whatever we create when we're looking at these liberating structures or other inclusive practices that we want to bring into the asynchronous context, it has to actually align with the original goals of the activity. So we didn't want to call something a troika and have it be like vaguely a troika. There's really clear expectations around this activity, around sitting and listening and reflecting on the needs of others. And it wouldn't be what we wanted it to be if it just happened to be asynchronous and also called a troika. So I guess for us, this is a difference between a really good cover of a song that tells you something new about the song versus one where you're like, what? No, that's not what it's about at all. And then finally, we wanted to take advantage of the potential of asynchronous work. There's a lot there. We can do so much as a community if our community can get really, really broad. And also that idea that that we can speak to people from the past who've been involved in something and then speak forward to the future is really, really interesting. I'm clapping because what I wanted to say was cool. It's very cool. And Chris and I like thinking about how that's possible. And that really is only possible until we invent time travel of some kind in the asynchronous space, right? You can speak to people who've been there before and speak for those who may join later in ways that are really different when you do this kind of work. So that's our balance. Those are the ways we find ourselves and how we try to root ourselves in the work. After that, we've got the oh, sorry, Chris.
Also, another pattern I spotted on this one, it's about balance, and a 3-legged stool is the only stool in 3-dimensional space which will balance without wobbling on an uneven surface. And, you know, a non-wobbling stool can help you to focus and find your balance.
And now, Chris, the troika.
So you may be familiar with troika consulting, but don't worry if not. It's an approach which we love, which you can find a great guide to on liberating structures. And we have used it in one of our modules in particular, on open knowledge, to try and provide a space for participants to get some feedback from their peers on how they might relate openness to their role or to their practice. But the aim of it is you get into groups of three, like the three horses pulling the carriage here, and each person comes up with a challenge or a problem which they would like help with. Their two other peers then ask clarifying questions to ensure they understand the challenge or the problem. Then the person who has articulated their challenge goes silent, and traditionally in troika they might sit facing away from their other peers, and they listen in silence while their two peers generate ideas and coaching questions and advice for a set period of time, which, if Jenny's involved, will be a prime number of minutes. Then there is a thanking section where the peer with the challenge thanks their other two peers and maybe summarizes some key takeaways or things that were helpful to them. We add into this stage an extra reflection period to try and help identify for the other two peers things which they were thanked for, which they might have not expected. You then switch around and repeat for everyone else's challenge. So it's about listening, it's about being, it's about accepting a variety of ideas from your peers. And we think it's also a way of reflecting on the value that you can bring to a consulting situation. Then there can be a full group kind of reflection and sharing, and we add a solo reflection after that. So that's troika. We're now going to talk about the potential for how this might be made asynchronous, because in its traditional formulation, it is a synchronous activity done in the moment in groups of three in fairly strictly timed sections.
So we want to do this together. On the previous slide, you might have seen that was a picture of an actual troika. So that was it's a traditional sort of Russian carriage pulled by three horses, hence the name for the activity, because it was divided into three sections. This one I'm mostly just indulging myself. That's my desktop screen. So it says it all the time, but it says good morning and have a revolutionary day. And we wanted to have that sort of be our vibe for this bit, because we'd like to work with you together to think about what might be what might be the way we'd sort of process something like a troika. So we're acknowledging its liberating structure, the way it asks us to listen. It asks us to also then create, you know, in the shoes of someone else and seek solutions or at least support. And then though it leaves the agency with the person who has presented the problem in the first place by having them do the reflecting and the takeaway, which allows for them to contextualize and in fact sometimes most powerfully dismiss the suggestions of others to kind of drill down to what's really going to be useful to them. So what we'd like to do right now is just spend a bit of time chatting with you. You can use the chat, you can raise your hand, you can just start talking. It's not a large group today. And we'd like to look at these three questions. So we're back to my my preferred number of things. The first one we want to look at is what are the core elements of the activity that must be preserved? So given what you know about troika so far, it might only be what Chris has said, but you might also participate in it in the past. What are the core elements of the activity that must be preserved? We'll do that first, but if you like thinking about things that are going to happen next, then we're going to think about how can you make those activities accessible first. And that for us means essentially two things. As Chris was saying, it needs to be something that will work anywhere. So if you're thinking of an online resource, it can't require you to run it on a massive computer. It can't require huge amounts of data or a live link up or anything like that. We used to talk about those Nokia brick phones, if anybody remembers them, right? If you could read it on there while you're doing Snake, then it was accessible to us. So it needs to be really easy to use for a variety of reasons. And then we'll talk about enhancing it. So in the chat, let's just take a couple of minutes, maybe more like 3, and you guys will have a think. Add something in or raise your hand when you have a thought. What are the core elements of the activity that must be preserved? What do you think are the important things in troika? And if you're joining us online, just before Mia talks, feel free to add something in the comments. All right, Mia, thank you.
One thing I love about troika is the part where you listen and you hear in real time 2 other people talking about what they heard in the problem that you're experiencing or that you want to address. Something about the dialogue between the other two and your stance of purely listening is very empowering on some level. It's almost like an active, generous eavesdropping. How could we create that possibility in asynchronous spaces is a very interesting proposition.
Yes. And it also requires you to listen actively, because 2 people are talking. You can't do that thing where you're kind of half listening, but really getting ready to say something, can you? Or I guess you could try, but it's much more difficult. What else do we think are the core elements of troika that need to be preserved?
I think building on what Mia's just said and what Jenny's commented on it, the fact that you have to listen in silence, kind of like Jenny says, it doesn't you don't have anything to prepare for. You're not going to because you're listening in silence, you're not allowed to respond to the feedback or the questions that you get from your peers. So all you can do is listen.
And that changes the dynamic, doesn't it, as well? I think although I often don't ask people to turn their backs anymore because I see why you would do that, but it makes some things very uncomfortable. So I make it an option. I think it's really interesting when, as Chris was saying, you can't interject and correct. So you really have to reflect in your own head, like, okay, that doesn't feel quite like what I was saying. Why would they go there? And it's a good practice for being a generous listener. Not to use my children as examples too often, but it just occurred to me that this would be good practice when your sibling is saying something and you want to tell them they're wrong, right? You need to just sit and let them finish having a think, and then learn from that.
It's good practice it's good practice in partnerships and marriages too.
Yeah, it makes the activity one reason it is a liberating structure is it's a relational practice, isn't it? It's not a constant demonstration of sort of superiority of expertise or correction and that kind of thing. So I think that's core as well. That
the way you just said it is perfect. Yeah. I'll
So
also add one other thought that came to my mind. I find that the first part, the launch place, is a harder part. Figuring out what your problem is and being able to say it in a way that sets up something that's truly meaningful. I think that might be the hardest part of troika in my experience.
Mm-hmm.
Is that because you're putting some pressure on yourself to come up with the right problem?
Most likely. I just am hyper aware that there's so much possibility in the experience of it that perhaps I really want to set the course the right way so that I can grow. So it's about self-pressure and kind of trying to engineer it to start in the right way. But I notice that I have that experience when I do troika.
And also just articulating the problem in a clear, precise way that with the intention that it will be understood as you intend, I think can, to some extent, force you to make certain decisions about the problem. It forces you to set the problem in stone, as it were, doesn't it? Which, it might be in your head and there might be many different branches and many what ifs and stuff, but it kind of forces you to write down or articulate one problem, which can be hard.
Yeah. You want to go ahead, Heather?
Sorry. I think another element that needs to be preserved is the two people who are listening, that they listen carefully and they give advice or their thoughts as best as they can, that this reflective part is also retained.
That's it. Yes, absolutely. And it's a really good segue into the next part of the discussion, which is how do you make those things kind of accessible? So how do you make it sort of it doesn't mean to make it easy to do, because Mia noted it is difficult, but how could you make it maybe simple? And when we're thinking about that, what can you add or enhance because you're moving to an asynchronous activity? So for me, one of the things that I think is nice and what we'll demonstrate in the tool is I often think better when I'm writing, or more clearly. I think more slowly. That's what it is. When I'm talking, I just let myself talk and think as fast as I can move my mouth. When I'm writing, I have to pick the words. And so I find it a lot easier to be clear from the start if I'm writing something down, because it's going through that extra bit of processing in my language. So in order to make it more accessible and easier for someone to understand, asking me to write it is probably, or people like me who have my style, is one of those things. And that's what you can do when you're using something asynchronously. You could do it synchronously, but it might disrupt the process a bit, I think, if everyone was spending loads of time writing stuff down. But when you're doing it asynchronously, you can take that time. It's an extra enhancement. So I wonder what else we have things around the conversation, it being relational, the ability to pick a really powerful problem, the listening on both directions. So what are the ways we can make that accessible or enhance the experience if we're moving asynchronously? You can also add things in the chat if you would rather write it down.
I think that maybe reflection is more powerful when we have time with things. Like when we're able to just sit, have a think and sit with something. And asynchronous might afford the pause space and the grappling with the thought, or the problem rather, for longer in a way, so that people can become more confident in their response to the challenge question.
Yes, very good point. And I think a similar point is that when you talked about the difficulty of articulating the challenge and then ensuring that your peers understand it as you intend, asynchronous allows for more time in that segment, so that you don't have to limit yourself to a challenge which can be easily articulated and understood in the space of a couple of minutes. You could see the asynchronous troika as something much more long term, where the period of articulation and clarification could be a very long period, and then you only move on to the next stage when everyone understands, whereas the synchronous version has obvious constraints in terms of time and space.
I wonder too if when we're talking about accessibility, the idea that there can be a gap, like an air gap between the steps. So when you're in the space and there's three of you and it's timed, and so you're kind of paying attention to the time, and also there might be other people in the room, and that can feel like a lot. And I noted that Mia felt pressure to like come up with the right problem, right? And when you can be by yourself a little bit, that can make this sort of process more accessible as well. You remove some of the pressures that we internalize, not because they're helpful for our learning, but because they're how we've navigated being in places with other people. And I think that can be really freeing, especially perhaps as practice for then coming together. One thing I think is lovely about tools like this is you can practice. And those of us who find new stuff quite stressful could have a go at troika first and then come in and do troika. And it might feel really freeing in that circumstance where you feel a familiarity with the process. So you're not trying to simultaneously learn the activity and inhabit a space that might also put pressures on you. That extra time can really be quite freeing.
And in the synchronous space, you can only really have one discussion happening concurrently. And then, you know, somewhat surprisingly, in the asynchronous space, you can actually you could actually have all three parts of the process. So a person outlining their problem and receiving feedback on it, all three people's problems could be happening at the same time. They needn't, but it does, I guess, you don't have the limit that you can only have one audio conversation happening at once, because messages can be, you know, flying past each other under the sea and so on.
Oh, there. So what we're going to do next is spend some time with the tool Chris has created. So I guess some helpful background here is that Chris and I spend a lot of time, and Kathy's noting that there needs to be more scaffolding around expectations so people are not wondering when to expect responses. Yes, we have. We are absolutely going to talk about that. There are some barriers. So one of the things that Chris and I have been talking about for a long time is how to do this in open spaces that engages with lots of people and therefore gives you a better chance. And then also then how do you in those spaces, if you can't create the expectations sort of socially, the way we do by having our community agreements in MYFest and by being so clear what the people who attend, you know, might value, how can you do that sort of more broadly? And when we're thinking about our day jobs, how can you do that with students who may not immediately see the how helpful, right, taking this kind of time with this kind of tool might be, right? How do you establish those expectations? So one of the things we were going to talk about is the way we set it up. So Chris has actually developed the tool, and we've created one especially for MYFest. So this is one of the ways we make this safe and inclusive for this community is we can have it's sort of a secret link, but really it's just a non-publicized space. So it is open if you would share with other people. We would ask that you not share it outside of MYFest unless we decide as a community to do so. This is your special link, and we'll also put it in the Discord. So MYFest special link to the Troika tool. And we've already tried making it this an asynchronous resource. So what we're going to do with you now is ask you to do a few things. First, if you could click through, if you don't mind giving it a go with us live. Otherwise, you can just watch, so we'll take you through it. If you click through where it says activate, you should be taken to what Chris is showing on the screen, which is a welcome and a very basic but high contrast, speaking of the accessibility, landing page. And it asks you what you might want to be called here, because we think it's really important that people get to define their own identity, both how public and private they are, but also just what they prefer. So I'm for example called Jennie Rose in all spaces. It's my social media nickname, and then Chris often goes by Chriso. And it allows you to inhabit the space to the extent that you feel comfortable. So it makes it that safe space, and then hopefully the activity inside of it is what makes it brave. So you give it a try if you'd like. Let us know if you're having any issues with the activate button. The first iteration of this, I couldn't find the submit button.
I then made it bigger.
Yes, so Chris had to make it bigger because that was before I got these. So that was one of the reasons I went to get my eyes checked. So it was on my phone.
So I can now see my page has updated. So I'm now in a troika group with me, Jennie, and Mia.
And so what this does is it does some things automatically. So it automatically, well, Chris has designed it so it puts you in that group of 3. It will automatically give you the set of instructions and allow you to define your own name. And the spaces that it leaves, right, the stuff that it doesn't interfere with are that presentation of the problem, the reflective discussion, and then the reflective takeaway. Because what we can take care of on the sort of back end technologically are pairing people up and leaving them together. But what we don't want to interfere with, anyone who's had anything generative AI turned on at work, it's never going to suggest it write your problem for you. We're not really interested in that. that would definitely interfere with the learning of the activity, right? It's not going to summarize it for you. It's not going to try and collate everyone's feedback. What this is doing is setting up the important thing that we noted was that relational practice, that place to listen to each other and then reflect on what you heard. So I had put something in, and or Chris had also put something in. So we each put in challenges. Mine is longer. So we can, do you want to take yours, Chris, and you could explain it?
Sure.
And then you could share the feedback. Yeah.
So I thought I would like advice on building playful approaches into asynchronous activities. So the idea here is Jennie and Mia, if they have any clarifying questions about that, they can post those to me and I will see them come up live. And I can then respond to them before we start. So we've kind of put the steps for the process as we've formulated it up here. So, you know, ask me to reflect on the prompt to write my challenge, which I've already done. I can go down to Jennie's section. I could ask a question. For example, I can post that to Jennie and that will come up on Jennie's phone, I think, where she's running it. And then she could respond. So the idea here is in the synchronous troika, we have to have person A's problem and clarification first, followed by person B and C's feedback and advice and questions, then person B's question. The idea here is all of the problems or challenges can happen at the same here she is, can happen first, and then all of the feedback can happen, and it doesn't really matter what order it happens in. So if one of the people takes longer to come up with their question, that doesn't stop the whole activity. So we kind of see this as it has to be seen as a long-term activity because it's asynchronous, but we do think there are some benefits which we've kind of discussed some of already. So Jennie said, what would you consider playful? Good question. I think I was thinking about it in terms of the activity. I'm going to avoid going off on a really long tangent and just say the activity. So now I've clarified my question. Jennie and or Mia could start posting. So I am instructed to go off and read my peers' challenges. So while Jennie and Mia are writing some advice for me, I can be looking at their challenges and giving them advice. So in this way, it happens asynchronously. Things can stack in parallel or not. Oh, brilliant. Okay. So another clarifying question. So this is just a little taster of what we're building, really. And obviously we're yeah, okay. Yeah. So I'm
trying to resist answering Mia's question while I'm trying to explain this tool at the same time. So.
Yeah. So I would then answer the question and then I would get some feedback, and you can see everyone gets a slightly different color of bubble. But as Jennie has said, you get to choose your own display name. So you'll have seen when you click the link, it gives you like a sort of anonymized one with an emoji and a number. So you can be sort of anonymous, or you can put your name or a pseudonym. And this is using a tool which we developed called Comment Stream, which we can share a link to some examples of that as well, which is a public thing. So this troika playtest we're doing within this community first, but the comment stream is a thing which we have publicly, which allows you to anonymously comment or give responses to a prompt or share your experience or your opinions. And we find that really, really valuable. And it's completely anonymous apart from everyone has their own color. So we kind of adapted that a little bit into this format to give you a little bit more anonymity, if that's a word. And as Jennie says, to make it accessible, easy to get into, open, but also a little bit personal and much more safe feeling kind of space. Because you're only in a group of 3 and no one else outside of that group, he says screen sharing it with the session. I hope Mia and Jennie don't mind. No one outside of that group can see it. So that's how it looks. We don't want to do the whole thing within this session because we are calling it an asynchronous activity, and we feel like the value of it will be in the long-term usage. But we've shared the link. Hopefully, the rest of you will be put into troika rooms too. We can check the occupancy of each room. So if there's anyone who's in there on their own, one of us can join on a different on a burner phone, as it were, and join in so that you're not alone. But that is one challenge, because in the synchronous version, you know how many people are in the room or in the Zoom, and so you can set up the groups accordingly. Whereas with this format, you don't know how many people are going to join, and also you don't know when they're going to join. So people can join this activity with that link at any time. So we built it so that it basically will assign you to the emptiest, to a room which is not yet full, and it will always try to fill up a room before starting a new one. So that minimizes the impact of that, but it still leaves the chance that you end up with a room of 1 or 2. So when we run this for real, what we do is Jennie and I will not join a room until a little bit after we've started it, and then if there's a room with 1 or 2 in it, 1 or 2 of us will join that room to make up the numbers. But I think that's sort of an unavoidable. But then you might have a steady stream of people joining it over time, and in which case the rooms would always eventually get filled up.
And going back to Kathy's point around expectations, one of the things that we talk about when we talk about this is how it's a space where it's okay to like rock up. So as Mia was noting, I think we put pressure on ourselves to provide the problem. But when we link it to our module, we often say, like, you could ask something about open knowledge, open education, open philosophy, or you could go in there with the intention of feeding back. And so if usually there's at least one person who's quite keen to get started, and if you're the second person, the pressure is off you to come up with something immediately to really to be the first client. And so what it lets you do is see the process and the call and response, and it's just a bit slower. And I think as well, for those people for whom listening to a problem is a little overwhelming, right? They get very focused on one aspect. It's hard not to ask questions, right? The client presents and then they're meant to not talk to you again. This relieves that tension, and it allows for people to really participate to the greatest extent that they can on discussing the problem. If what you wanted to teach people was learn to deal with the information that you've got, which is a very good skill, right? Produce something that then someone can respond to and then sit back again. That's really important. But we've not decided to prioritize that aspect of troika in the asynchronous space. What we've decided to prioritize is the call and response between the 2 people. But we're hopeful that by removing some of the pressure, that makes it easier and you can generate that kind of energy. So although you have one issue, which is how do you get people to join in, which is a perennial educational problem, isn't it? We're hopefully making other things more open. So what we're going to do now, and all we wanted to spend the rest of the time on, was thinking briefly about your experience of either looking at that, or if you went in and activated, how it went for you. And then secondly, what it means to learn in this space. I'm sure I've used this XKCD in MYFest before, but if not, and if you've somehow missed XKCD, first, you're in for a treat. And then second of all, this particular one, you're in for a treat. So one of the most famous of these comics, he used to work at NASA. He's a physicist, Randall Munroe. but this is one of his most famous comics. He's famous for these line drawing ones. And I use it a lot when I'm talking about learning, because it talks about being one of today's lucky 10,000. You're lucky to be learning something new. And so what we wanted to talk about with you at the very end today, and we'll stop screen sharing so we can just see everyone's faces, is what it might feel like either to have learned something new, like looking at this asynchronous tool, or to be in this space and be a new learner as someone taking part in it. Because one of the things we've noticed on our module is that there's a nearly even divide between people like, that was so much better. You know, like I really dread, even the things that are online, I dread being in a breakout room. I don't want to be put in pairs unless I'm really comfortable. It was just so much easier. And that, or on the other hand, there are people who are just like, I don't respond to text, you know, like it didn't feel like I was talking to a person. And so we wanted to have a quick conversation with you. We don't have loads of time left, about what it feels like to be a learner in the asynchronous space, and what we might be able to either take away and work on, or just acknowledge, because sometimes you just have to be in spaces where you're not totally comfortable when we're working with people. So how did that feel, I guess, is the question. Or did you have any technical issues you'd like us to solve?
I like the different colors. Right away, it gives a feeling of different people. So that is just a nice little design thing. And I definitely appreciate just being able to take my time with thinking and then writing. It's so powerful. I was thinking about the sort of challenge part, and for me, I always am struggling in my life with bandwidth issues, like how much time do I have for anything where it's really taking my full self into something. And I think this is more time engaged kind of work on some level, which is good. But then also, if you're flooded because of life, you know, because of the design of the world now, it might end up feeling like too many things. But that's my like personal reaction to everything these days. But I suspect everybody feels a little of that. And so I'm wondering if like how that, you know, if we could talk about that a little bit, like how we could make it so it didn't feel heavy, and that people could come around when they want to, which is the asynchronous thing, without if it's in a context of like a university or academics in any form, it turns into, I've got to do that thing.
I wonder about the framing as well. One of the things I think about with troika, when I've heard other people explain it, I don't always tend to do this, is it's very focused on like, you have to give good advice. Like there's a lot of judgment, right? Like, is it a meaty problem? Is it good advice? What did everyone learn? And I wonder if in the asynchronous, because you can keep going back and forth, I wonder if one of the things Chris and I could add is like, your first question can be silly, like, or clarifying, or whatever. It doesn't matter. Do you have time to just go, I see you, I agree, that is a problem. You know, is solidarity all you've got the capacity for? And I wonder if we flip it a little bit from that quite rigorous, like this is to solve something, kind of feeling. Also, people do tend, every once in a while, when I do it live, someone will say something like, you know, the climate crisis. I'm like, we can't fix that now. Like, it's okay to want to discuss it, but like also, and so I wonder if another thing to do is link it to the 15% solution a bit more earnestly, a bit earlier, and just be like, well, needs to be something that feels like you can address it. You know, like existential dread is perhaps something for communities who are synchronously together and can support each other in body as well as, you know, with their words. This might be for something slightly different. That was just my response.
And one thing we added was I went all blurry there, didn't I? The adding a couple of deliberate steps for further reflection on what the client has fed back to you as a consultant, and whether that tells you anything you might not have considered before. So I guess because when we are running this activity in our module on openness, we're thinking not only about kind of discussing a problem with peers, but also getting some feedback yourself on where you might fit into other people's problems. So maybe making the expectation on the problem or challenge even smaller and putting more emphasis on the feedback in a brainstorming sense of just generate ideas without screening them. And maybe the affirmation, maybe we could add, we have thought about adding sort of emoji reactions to the messages, so that if you don't really have anything to say, but you just want to say that's a really good challenge or that's really nice feedback, maybe you can just add a reaction to it.
So we've only got about 10 minutes left. Has anyone, so we use this alongside the comment stream and anything else I can convince Chris to invent in quite a bit of the work that we do in the library and at Manchester. I do wonder, or it is one of those things, one of the things that we are committed to in our day jobs is ensuring that everything we do is Creative Commons license and shareable. And I suppose one of the things we'd like people going away to reflect on is how useful, or if this kind of tool fits into your pedagogy, and if so, why, and if not, why not? Not in a why not, you should be able to kind of way, but I think sometimes we forget what the options are because, like Mia said, we're always so full up. You can't do anything more, and so it's very difficult to consider doing something different. And so this is one of those things where we wanted to kind of gently put out there that there are different ways to approach things like building community or asking people to come together and talk to each other, that in the end may free up different kinds of spaces and conversations in your work and what you do. So what were you going to say, Chris? Yeah.
Yeah, I was agreeing, but I was just thinking, so talking about openness, so this is a tool that we're still kind of developing. The source code we can share, and we plan once it's kind of more fully tested is to share that openly, but also thinking about, if you're not in any, so we run this tool on the on the Manchester domain. We try and develop as many of that tools that they can be run on completely free systems. But one thing I was thinking about earlier was what's the more minimal way to run something like this? Because this is a system which I've developed. But you could run it in a shared Google document, for example. You could create a Google document with 3 people with editing rights who then respond to a template in the document by filling in sections or add comments on it. And you could even be notified when people make changes or add comments. So there are other ways of doing this. But at the same time, we do want to, when we develop something like this, to share it openly. And, if we can make it available for other people to use on our system as well. So yeah, I don't know if anyone has any comments on that or questions or thoughts.
Kathy asked if we'd tested it already, and I was with our students, and we have done. We tried last year, didn't we? So the comments we've been using for ages, and that works really well. Everyone loves a comment. Everyone loves the chance to be like, yes, this is what I think about a thing. Oh, you said that. This is what I think. That's actually Mia was thinking about it. That's very light touch. It feels like, you're kind of dropping in and out. You don't have to read all of it ever. You can read like the last thing someone said. It's very engaging that way. This one we tried to drop in. We have a very weird postgraduate structure to this, the program that our module is part of. And so the last of the synchronous sessions where you kind of get everyone ready to do the assessment is like, it's 3 months. It's ages before the actual assessments due. So we tried to drop the troika in that gap in between so that there would be some involvement you know, so that people didn't sort of wake up in August and go, oh my God, my assessment, which is usually what happens. And it kind of worked. So one person used it quite a bit. And I think 2 other people who have logged in responded once and they were like, but it was the wrong timing. And because we hadn't built it in from the beginning, I think this is one of those things, we're going back to Kathy's very first question, where you have to expect the engagement with it. You can't kind of be like, in addition, as Mia was learning, here's something else for you to do. Even though it'll be really helpful, we promise. And these are members of staff, and they're all working really hard during the time period. That gap isn't there because, you know, we're just being silly. It's there because everyone's actually, it's like a really peak time at the uni, so they can't really do their assessments until it's over. So there's good reasons for it, but I don't think we got the timing right there, and I don't think we introduced it early enough. And if we were purely async, I think we would have used it earlier and perhaps more, and not just no. Yeah.
So I was like, MYFest is really a perfect space to test this in. Because MYFest is, you know, has an asynchronous space, and I really like that. So yeah, any feedback appreciated. We made a thread in the playtest in the games channel in the Discord, where we're going to share the link with everyone, so not just people who can make this synchronous session, but everyone in the MYFest Discord can join it, and then people can share feedback, we can share updates on, you know, what we're thinking and what we're developing and so on. I might try building a minimalist Google Docs version to test, and, you know, just to force ourselves to ask the question, do we need all of this technology, or are we just using it because it's there? So yeah.
And so that's us. At the end of the slides that we've shared is like a QR code with all of the links to all of my things, because it's probably easiest. But Chris is also available in the whatever in the normal MYFest spaces.
Yes, I will add a QR code, but I forgot to do that.
Yeah, but that's us for today. We still have a few minutes if you want to ask questions, but Noreen, we could stop the recording in case people just wanted to chat. And then yeah, it's been lovely, but we